The tomahawk ribeye is my favorite steak, and I'm going to show you all of my favorite tips and tricks when it comes to grilling the perfect steak on the Kamado Joe. Hey, I'm James from Smoking Dad Barbecue, and I promise when you are done with this video, you're never going to want to order steak at a restaurant again. Whether you're a beginner or a pro, the point is we are always learning and evolving. Now, before I started this channel, I'd been grilling on a Kamado style grill for over a decade, but the fact that I have video evidence to go and look back on, I can see that even in the last couple years, we're trying new things and improving our grill game. So rather than send you on the world's greatest scavenger hunt to try and pick out all these little tips and tricks of things and experiments I've done over the years, I'm gonna pack all that cumulative knowledge and expertise into one video so you can hit the ground running, whether this is, like I mentioned, your first steak on a Kamado style grill or your thousandths. We are gonna turn out a winner. So without further ado, let me tell you what you're in for. So I found the secret to the perfect steak on the Kamado Joe is to do a bunch of small little things together and execute them flawlessly rather than go for the one really big overdramatic thing. And so the steak recipe that I'm going to share today is my 5-layer steak crust. And so those layers consist of a couple things. One, we are going to salt dry brine this. That's going to help give the salt time to penetrate the meat deeply and add some seasoning, as well as help the steak retain more moisture once it hits the heat. Then we're going to go to our binder. So our binder is a truffle oil infused hot sauce. And I mentioned hot sauce, don't worry, you're not going to taste any hot sauce, but you are going to get some umami flavor from that truffle oil. Then we're going to get the aromatic or the flavors from our rub, including some fresh cracked black pepper and garlic and a whole bunch of other really good stuff. And then our 4th and 5th layers are going to be the smoke. Now, when it comes to smoking a steak, I'm not a big fan of a lot of smoke, especially on steak. It is really easy to overdo that. But I've done an experiment side by side, and the ash drawer trick worked really well. So I'm going to show you how to get a nice clean fire with a subtle hint, a kiss of smoke, if you will, rather than the first thing that we do is get it to slap us across the face. And then last and perhaps most important is our sear. And today I'm going to share with you a couple options for a sear sauce. Have you ever heard of a sear sauce? It's basically starts with a lot of mayonnaise. We add a couple other ingredients. But that mayonnaise is fat, so as it renders down, sort of lubricates the steak, it gives an amazing crust. And so all of these things are going to come together into a perfect steak that, like I mentioned at the beginning, you are never going to want to go to a steakhouse and order steak off the menu again, because it won't hold a candle to today's steak. So to get started, I'm going to take you back to yesterday when I started getting ready on the steak. You can tell this has been dry brining in the refrigerator overnight. The surface has dried out, which is going to help get a great Maillard reaction. You can see the seasoning and the ingredients on there. So we're going to step back to yesterday when you want to prepare our rub for the dry brine and give that 24 hours in the fridge. I'm also going to show how to make the sear sauce. And since I was doing a version of this for some Alabama white chicken, I'm going to use that same sauce on today's video. But a sear sauce that I normally go to would be things like mayonnaise, a little bit of red wine vinegar, salt, pepper, garlic. Just mix that up and slather that all over for a great sear. Alabama white sauce, as you'll see in this recipe, it's almost the same thing, plus or minus a little bit of cayenne pepper, which is awesome, and some mustard, but it tastes like really similar. So I'd rather make a fresh batch dedicated to just the sear sauce. I'll put the sear sauce recipe up on the screen so you have that, but the instructions are nearly identical to Alabama white sauce. So try either one, see if there's one that you like more. But let me take you back to yesterday where we're going to prepare our dry brine as well as our sear sauce, and I'll rejoin you in a couple of minutes time. We're getting ready to build our fire, and I'll show you how to set up the Kamado for the perfect tomahawk ribeye. If you haven't seen it before, my favorite Texas style dry brine rub is mostly a bit of pepper, some salt, with that salt content actually split between two, evenly between Diamond Crystal Kosher salt as well as Lowry's, and then add a little bit of garlic at the end for some good measure. But this in some cooks is just on the borderline of being a little bit too much salt, which is what I'm getting from the Lowry. So instead of doing 2 tablespoons of black pepper, a tablespoon of Diamond Crystal Kosher salt, and a tablespoon of Lowry's, we're going to break the tablespoons in the salt down into teaspoons. So 1 tablespoon is 3 teaspoons. So what I'm going to do is do 2 teaspoons of Lowry's and 4 teaspoons of Diamond Crystal kosher salt, as that will help just reduce the saltiness a little bit while keeping some of those great flavors. The other thing that has made a huge difference is using something like this fresh cracked black pepper versus the pre-cracked stuff here that I'm using from Costco. The only problem with this is it's really slow, especially when we need something like 4 tablespoons. So I went and I finally got myself one of these. Let me show you the difference it makes. So even though I know the fresh stuff always tastes better than the pre-ground, when you need something like 4 tablespoons, getting enough pepper out of a traditional grinder just takes a long time. Like, I haven't even made a dent here. That's maybe an eighth of what I need. So I got the Man Kitchen pepper cannon after Christmas. Let me show you the difference this makes at getting the volume of pepper we need quickly. So in elapsed time, that was just maybe about 30 seconds, and you can see we've got a full container of fresh cracked black pepper. And I wish there was such thing as smell-o-vision, because if we were just to take a whiff of what sort of peppercorn oils we're getting in the pre-ground stuff, I mean, you can tell it's pepper, and this is maybe great for a soup or adding to your eggs, but in comparison, knock your socks off. That's where you're reminded that pepper is actually a spice. And like I mentioned, I started small, and I actually took the time to grind that out a few times, and I was absolutely sold on the difference. But when I saw the pepper cannon can do that about 10 times quicker, I had to try it, and it is totally worth it for rubs like this. So this is definitely going to be something you'll see more of as we go forward, because the flavor impact here is significant. So let's get back to making up the rest of our rub. So since I'm actually cooking a couple other things, I'm going to, as I mentioned, double the rub. So instead of 2 tablespoons, I'm going to go for 4 of our fresh cracked black pepper here. Then we're going to want 2 tablespoons of our Diamond Crystal kosher salt. And now, since we're adding the ratio, instead of being 50-50, we're going to add a little bit extra of our Diamond Crystal kosher salt using a teaspoon. So since I'm doubling the recipe, it's going to be 2 teaspoons of Diamond Crystal kosher salt. Next, we're going to go 4 teaspoons of our Lowry's and 1 tablespoon of garlic. Mix that up well, and our salt and pepper rub is ready to go. So this next part is optional, but highly recommended. I'll put the Hey Grill Hey Alabama white sauce recipe that I'm using today up on the screen on the side, so you have all the exact measurements, but let me show you how we're going to whip this together in under a couple minutes. So this sauce is super simple to make. We're just going to use some real mayonnaise. I've got some salt, pepper, along with some cayenne pepper, some brown sugar, some coarse whole grain mustard, along with a little bit of lemon juice, as well as some horseradish and apple cider vinegar. Let's get this all together in our pan so we can mix it up and incorporate it really well. So that looks good. We're just going to cover this up and get that in the fridge for a couple hours to get to know one another. So now that we've got our rub made up about 24 hours ahead of time, we want to start the process of dry brining. This is maybe one of the most important things you can do to make a huge difference in your cooking at home, as the salt has time to penetrate into the meat deeply, as well as the fridge and the salt sort of help create a better Maillard reaction by drying the outside of the surface. So to do that, I like to get my steaks out. We're going to pat them dry so they're nice and ready to take on our binder. So I'm going to use Truff hot sauce. If you weren't going to use Truff hot sauce, you didn't have to pat them dry. You could just use the natural moisture on the steak to help your rub stick. But I actually want it dry, and to replace that moisture with Truff hot sauce, since this has truffle oils in it that just really enhance the flavor. And I promise you will not taste any hot sauce when these are fully cooked. So that'll be our binder. We'll hit it with our rub, and we'll get these in the fridge to sit overnight. Okay, I've already cleaned out our Joe. Our bottom vent is all the way open. We're going to open our top vent. And as you can see here, we're going to need a little bit more charcoal. I mentioned I don't like too much smoke, so I actually find, or my family helped me find, we get a great result with Fogo Super Premium. So let's just add a little bit more fuel for today's cook. Next, we want to get some heat into our dome. So I'm not going to install anything else at this point. The risk of doing that is you start blocking all the heat and your components get superheated, whereas you get no heat in your dome. And this is a really important step that I'll come back to in a moment's time. So no matter how you light your charcoal, we want to get some heat into our Kamado, and this is the best way to do that. I'm going to use the sous vide gun by Grill Blazer, since I can get my fire going with nice clean smoke in about 1 minute with the grill gun. This is the smaller, about half the power sous vide gun, and in about 2 minutes elapsed time. So let me take you fast forward while we get our fire going. So now that we've got our fire started, let me tell you a little bit about the setup for today's cook. We're going to cook this starting off indirect, because we are going to do something that's called a reverse sear. You could sear first and then finish, but in a Kamado style grill, you retain so much energy that getting that out of your grill can be a very time-consuming process waiting for this to cool back down. So not only is it more practical for a Kamado, you also get a much better sear as that surface dries out versus just putting a raw steak on the grill right away. So for these two reasons, I am 100% sold on the reverse sear method as being my favorite. And so since we want to start with indirect, you could do a couple things. You could go with your deflector plates, your slow roller if you have a Series 3 grill like my Big Joe or my Classic Joe behind me, or you could do what I absolutely love and go for the double indirect method, where we're going to combine both methods. Now, why would you do this, and why do I think this is really important? The double indirect method is all about altering the heat sources inside of our grill. We have our conduction heat, which is our tomahawk ribeye sitting on the grid. And so that grid's going to be hot, that's going to be transferring energy. Plus the fire coming up from the bottom, there's going to be a lot of energy on the bottom that is going to run the risk of cooking our steak. So we start to get that crust, then that big gray band, and we don't want that. And so to help counteract that, I want to reduce the conduction energy, have great radiant energy, which is getting our dome heat soaked, so that is radiating in some heat nice and evenly and baking it from all sides. And I want to jack up to level 10 the convection airflow. So this is a bit of a weakness from a really energy efficient grill, is that it just retains heat so well, it doesn't need to move a lot of air. And when it comes to something with smoke or charcoal, hot moving air in high volume is something that really makes a big difference in our taste. So that's what we're going to do today. Let me take you back to the Classic 3, show you how to set up for the double indirect if you want to give it a try, and I highly recommend you do. Okay, so for just a few minutes later, we are now up over 300 degrees Fahrenheit, and most importantly, what I'm feeling for is some heat in the dome. 350 degrees Fahrenheit should be warm. You definitely know there's heat there, but it's not something that will scald you to the point where you can't keep your hands there. If your dome is still cool, give it a little bit more time. Now, since I want to be cooking around 250 degrees, a general rule of thumb is to go, 50 to even 100 degrees Fahrenheit beyond what temperature you actually want to help make sure that your dome is heat soaked. Because what's going on is we're just getting some flames from our charcoal that we just ignited with our grill gun coming up and causing the temperature probe to read as hot as it is. So there's where we can see that fire just coming up. Now, if this is your first double indirect, or you've already tried it and you need a bit of a recap, let me show you how to set up. So first, we're going to drop in the base of our slow roller, just like so. Next, we're going to install the extension of the slow roller. And then the top, I like to flip mine between cooks. You can see I cooked off a bunch of food and grease last cook, so I'll put the other side to the bottom, alternate between cooks to help keep that nice and clean. Then we're going to drop in our divide and conquer rack. And as you can see here on the second position, I have the X accessory ring, which is going to hold our heat deflector plates. Then next, we're going to put our heat deflector plates, push them together nice and tight, make sure that they're supported properly on that X accessory rack. That looks good. Now we need our cooking grids. So we're going to drop these in right against the notches so that they're supported. If we were to go the other way, if you've not noticed, and we were to move around, there's a chance that the grid can rotate and come out of the divide and conquer rack and fall down. So to help prevent that from happening, we're just going to drop our grids right against these notches like so, and let our Joe come up to temperature. So we've just dropped a bunch of cool accessories, whether it's the slow roller or those ceramic plates. So it's going to take another couple minutes. We were seeing 300, 350 degrees. It's going to take a few minutes for that to recover. So since I'm looking for 250 degrees, I'm going to take a couple steps here. This is like if you were accelerating onto the highway. So imagine you're on an on-ramp and you absolutely floor the gas as hard as you can, and you're trying to land at, say, 60 miles an hour, if you're in full-on acceleration and you let off once you see 60, you're going to blow right past that, maybe 70, 80 miles an hour, depending on the rate that you were accelerating. So we don't want to do that because we're going to overshoot our temperature. So what we want to start doing is letting off the gas as we approach our target speed or our target temperature here. So at 250 degrees, when I see 200 on the dome, I'm going to go ahead and adjust the bottom vents down to 1 finger's width, as well as close the top vent, which is swung all the way open right now, but leave it in the maximum open close position, or in other words, the 4th line on the control tower top, which is giving as much air before moving to the swung open position. Then, as that continues to work its way from 200 to 250, we'll start working that top vent down towards about 1/4 or 1/8 of an inch past the first line is what we'll want today for approximate vent settings for 250 degrees Fahrenheit on the Kamado Joe Classic Series 3, which happens to also be about the same vent setting on the Big Joe Series 3. So I'll rejoin you in a couple minutes when we're ready to make those vent settings. While our grill is coming up to temperature, this is a perfect opportunity to install a meter probe or any other tracking temperature gauge that you may be using. I'm a big fan of the meter since it works for a variety of things, whether it's a cook like today where wires wouldn't really be an issue, or something like on the Joe Tisserie where it's the only solution that works. Plus, I love the app. It's simple, intuitive, easy to use, and it was upgraded last year to allow you to take notes so you can capture what went really well or maybe what didn't go so well and refer back to those cooks in the future to help make sure next time you fire up your grill, you either repeat what you want or avoid what you don't want. This also gives you an opportunity to mention the cook temperature. So I'm going to track today's cook, and I'm going to aim for about 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Some of you might be saying, oh, I want my steak medium rare, medium well, a little bit more well done. But what I was able to learn by using the meter probe is that our steak will continue carry over cooking. Coming back to that car analogy, getting on the highway, your steak is gaining temperature just like you may be when you're accelerating on the highway. And as soon as you stop cooking or let it off the gas, doesn't mean that your forward momentum stops. And so I found on a thick steak like this, it's pretty normal to gain anywhere between 5 on the really, really low side, but normally 7 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit during the rest. So if we pull it off at 120, this is going to carry over cook to upwards of about 130 degrees Fahrenheit. If I still have that forward momentum and then we sear it, it's going to just be like mashing the gas even further, and that's how we end up overcooking our steak. So to prevent all this from happening, what we really want to do is back off about 10 degrees from where you want it finished. I want my finishing temperature in that 130 to max 135 degree range. So I'm going to take the steaks off the grill at 120, let them carry over cook to about 130, and wait till I see the temperature coming the other way, because now we've lost that inertia. So when we throw it on for our sear, it's going to have to start recovering, coming back right to about where we took it off or where we want it to finish. And this one, I want in that 130 to max 135 degree range. So if you want some more or less, just add or remove 5 to 10 degrees to make sure you get your steak to your liking, but the principles will be exactly the same. So bring it nice and close, we'll get our probe, set it up for today's cook at 120 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you've never used a meter, it's really easy. We're just going to grab a probe, look for the line on the probe. This is where we want to make sure that we insert past so we get an accurate temperature reading from our food as well as on the ambient sensor. So I'm just going to line this up, go right here in the middle to that line. Looks good. Our tomahawk ribeye is ready to go on the Kamado Joe. Okay, as you can see, we are nearly at that 250 degree temperature range that I want, and I've already, before turning the camera back on, made my first adjustment. So now I'm going to make my second and likely final adjustment to about this 1/8 of an inch past the first line on the control tower top, which should land and hold nice and flat in and around that 250 degree Fahrenheit range. I'm picking 250 degrees because we want to bring the temperature of the steak up slowly so we get a nice, even, medium rare all the way through. If we were to go too hot, too fast, you start to really get that different color grading on the outside where it goes crust to brown to pink to then your medium rare, and then vice versa out the other side. So this looks good, and since we're nearly at that 250, I think we can get our steak on. Let's do that. Okay, we've got our steak on. Let's close the dome and let that cook. So now that we have our tomahawk ribeye, and you can tell it doesn't even look like there's any smoke coming outside of our Joe, but there absolutely is. You can feel the warm, clean smoke coming out of the control tower top. This is where, if we want the optional step of adding some smoke, I'm going to show you my ash drawer hack. Now, I mentioned optional because, again, it is way too easy to over smoke almost anything if you're not careful, especially things like poultry or steak, where a little bit goes a long ways. My kids use this analogy. Part of the reason I've absolutely been loving using Fogo is my youngest daughter said, you know, remember when we used to go to grandma's house and the first thing you notice when you walk in is just perfume, and it would hit you, and it was about the only thing you could notice until your palate got used to it? Well, when you're standing out here with charcoal, lighting your fire, smoking wood, that really saturates your palate. So when you eat your food, you think this is not so bad until you share it with family and friends and it's a little bit too strong for them. And the best way to actually get a sense of this is just save some food for leftovers and eat it the next day when your palate is nice and clean, and all of a sudden you'll be like, whoa, that's a little bit strong on the smoke scale. So this ash drawer hack is going to help make sure that we don't add too much smoke. Plus, the double indirect method is really encouraging a clean burning fire. It's working much harder down there. We're burning more fuel on purpose so that we get nice clean smoke without the downside of raising those temperatures. So I'll bring you nice and close. I'm going to grab a couple smoking wood chips and show you how to load them in our ash drawer for a nice, subtle, clean smoke on our tomahawk ribeye. So I've just got a handful of apple wood chips that are very light smoke. So again, I wouldn't want to do something like mesquite on my steak because that'll be a little bit too strong for our family's taste buds. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull this out and just drop and scatter these wood chips on our ash drawer, put that back in. I found this method is great because it helps solve not needing to take everything out of our grill. Our slow roller, our deflector plates, your food, which could be dripping grease anywhere. This allows us to add smoke. And just in case you're interested, this will last about an hour. If you were doing a long cook like brisket or pulled pork, you would just set a reminder every hour to add a little bit more wood. I'll rejoin you in a couple minutes when we've got an update on our tomahawk. Okay, the meter probe just let me know that our tomahawk ribeye has hit an internal temperature of 120 degrees Fahrenheit. I brought out the cutting board. Let's get it off and let it rest and set up for inferno mode. All right, let's get our tomahawk ribeye off. Oh, that looks good. Fat is rendering out beautifully. You can see that just running down there. So I'm gonna set that aside. We'll let that rest. What we want to do now is get rid of our deflector plates and our slow roller. So we'll set everything aside. I'll take it fast forward. When we come back, we're going to be dropping our grill grates in a nice low position. So I'm going to set our grill grates on the second level of the divide and conquer rack, since I sometimes find right down can be a little bit too close to the fire to the point where we could get some burnt, charred outside. So I'm going to set up for the second level. If we need to make an adjustment, we can drop those later on. For now though, we're going to close this back up, open our bottom vent and our top vent all the way so we can build an inferno mode sear. Okay, our tomahawk ribeye has finished resting and it peaked according to the meter. Outside, it would get a little bit further inside at 127 degrees, and it's now started to work its way back down a few more degrees. So I think we are ready to hit it with our sear sauce, take out our meter probe, and looking at our Kamado Joe Classic, our gauge is nearly pegged around 800 degrees Fahrenheit, which is going to be perfect. So let me bring you nice and close. We're going to dress up our steak with our sear sauce, and I'll meet you over on the Classic 3 behind me to get our sear on. So we'll just remove our meter probe. It's done its job of helping get us close to the pin, so we don't need that anymore. And we don't want to subject it to the 800 degrees Fahrenheit that's going on inside our Joe. So I'll set that aside. We're just going to get a little bit of our sear sauce out. Again, whether you're using this recipe or the actual sear sauce, they're very close. So we're just going to pour a little bit of that on and brush it all over. And this is going to serve as a little bit of flavor that'll help with our crust and our formation of flavors on the outside, as well as providing some extra fat to help make sure that everything cooks and crisp up exactly how we want it. That looks good. Let's go hit the grill. All right, as you can tell, we are hot. Our Joe is going almost deep purple on me here up top, which means it is cooking inside. So let's get this sear on the road. that looks just about perfect. Let's let that rest a minute and slice into it. Our tomahawk ribeye looks absolutely amazing. So total time was just about 30 seconds per side. And as you can tell, once that fat and starts to render and that mayonnaise falls down, hits the coals, that's when the flames really kick up. So if we had been on the lowest level, well, you'd be fine for the first few seconds. Once some of that rendered fat hits the coals, it'd be a little bit too easy to overdo our steak. But I'm really happy with the crust that we've got on this. I'll bring it nice and close and we'll slice it up. Some of you guys have asked for a review video comparing the different series of Dalstrong knives. So to help make that happen, I've just actually picked up the Big Daddy, the Omega series by Dalstrong. So if you'd like to see that, make sure you're subscribed for future videos. But that's tomorrow's video. Let's get to today's. Let's slice this open and see how we did. That is a beautiful edge-to-edge medium rare, which will bloom out even more once the oxygen hits it. Let's get a couple more slices for our taste test. This looks and smells amazing. So I just brought out a little bit of Malden smoked sea salt, so I'll try one piece without it, one piece with it, just see if it needs that or not based off of our dry brine, and share with you the results. Let's dig in. First, no salt. Cheers. There's so much going on. It's like a symphony of flavors, but like I mentioned, it's many subtle things executed flawlessly versus going for one single big bold thing. And it's because of that, your tongue's almost confused at what's going on here. So I try and unpack that sensation I just had, and I can't wait for the next one, is a little bit of everything. There's that umami. You can't taste the hot sauce, but there's just some depth to this that you don't get without that. Then you start noticing the beef flavor itself. We didn't over season this with other ingredients. You're tasting the beef, but it is juicy and seasoned all the way through. It's like a little gusher, those candies from the kind of 80s and 90s, but a delicious tomahawk version. It just explodes with flavor. And then you really start to get to appreciate that crust, the crunch and the texture, and that pepper, the spice, just gets a little bit of heat and then dissipates quickly. And it's a full kind of body and mind experience. Let's try a little bit more with salt with it, which if anything should just amplify a little bit of what's already there. So let's try a little Salt Bae. Go for another one. Really just want another one. Even better. Oh. Wow. Whether you've been cooking steaks your whole life or this is your first, I hope you find this is easy to pull off a steak that will blow your mind, your friends and family. And like I said at the beginning, my promise is you will never want to go out and order off a menu again, especially when you can make this at home on your own Kamado Joe. I hope you really enjoyed today's video. If you did, please be sure to let YouTube know by smashing that thumbs up button, and let me know by hitting easy for me to say, subscribe. I'm still thinking about that steak. And be sure to check out, if you're new, also the Kamado Joe 101 playlist that I'll link down below. I've got a whole series of videos from controlling your temperatures, building your fire, smoke wood, that'll elaborate on a lot more detail to help make sure you get the most out of your new grill. If that's the situation you find yourself in, let me be the first to congratulate you. I'm James from Smoking Dad Barbecue signing off. And remember, don't be afraid to fire it up. Wow. Yep. Go for a bit more. Oh, I'm in heaven. Oh.